Major phone carriers make you sign contracts with rigid data plans to trap you into a kind of forced phonogamy. Sounds pretty insecure if you ask me. At Consumer Cellular, we believe in a more consensual and healthy form of phonogamy, free of contracts and more flexible to your data needs. This way, you stick around not because we force you to with contracts and fees, but because you love our phone plans. Like ardently love our phone plans. Phonogamously. Consumer Cellular. When freedom calls, we're here to answer. Call us at 1-888-FREEDOM.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. I don't know quite what to call this episode, Kieran. It's like pod point 2 or 2 point, I don't know. Slightly different. We've got an interview for you because we are aware, as we said, that some of our Thursday shows have been getting very long and we haven't got the attention span to actually do them. How you've got the attention span to listen to them, I don't know. But thank you. I think, Kieran, assuming that this is the second pod our lovely listeners are tuning into, they probably want to know how the caper situation played out with the and Rocket Mayonnaise last night.
I'm afraid I had to slum it and use some tartar sauce from a jar.
From a jar?
From a jar.
That's not slumming it. Tartar sauce from a little plastic packet. That's what I had with my scampi and chips. Tartar sauce from a jar. Get you. Yes, so we have an interview for you. It's a fascinating one, I think, and it's with Mr. Ian Hine. Now, Ian Hine is an expert in football programmes, as most football fans think they are. In particular, Kieran, he's an expert in your club's football programmes, which, as I say, I was very good. You can hear the sound of my teeth gritting halfway through, but for the most part, I was very good. And here is that interview for you. Ian, thank you so much for joining us. I'm a football fan of a certain age, so I think I know why you love football programmes so much. But tell us how your passion came about.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I'm a huge fan of the pod, so it's a real honour. Like you, I'm also a man of a certain age, and I grew up with these amazing little booklets in the 60s and 70s, and as you probably know, I'm a Brighton fan, and my first game was in. Terribly sorry, but there we go. My dad took me to my first game in August 1968, and the story behind it was that my godfather's brother actually played for Torquay United, and they were playing Brighton, and he organised tickets, and we went along, and kind of that was it, really. But I think, like most kids in the 60s, I had a collecting gene in me, and not just programmes, but I've dabbled in stamps and train tickets and all kinds of other stuff. But programmes always seemed to be the thing that I came back to. And as I got older, I thought, well, what am I going to collect? I'll just collect everything. But obviously, with hundreds of games happening every weekend, it's pretty much impossible to have a general collection. So you've got to specialise in some shape or form. And obviously, with my club allegiance, I decided to specialise in Brighton programmes, but other collectors will specialise in FA Cup programmes or programmes from first and last games at stadiums, that kind of thing. But I've always loved them, and the fact that the programme is a unique historical artifact. I mean, I know that sounds a bit kind of dramatic and pompous, but if you think that that's really the only physical thing that links your attendance at the game, you've got a programme, it's got the manager's notes from that particular day, it's got the team lineups, and that's particularly so of older programmes, because it's a social snapshot of what life was like in that particular city at any one time. So rather than the modern day programs with a whole load of syndicated adverts from Snickers and Nike and McDonald's, etc. You had the adverts for your local stockist of the Brooks Rupture appliance, and the local sweet shop, they're just fantastic, and I absolutely love them.
It doesn't sound pompous at all, Ian, and I'm going to come on later on to what I think is the actual social and historical importance of football programmes. I apologise for giggling during part of your answer. It's when you said I dabbled in train tickets for a time. you sounded incredibly furtive. 2 questions about that first game. Do you still have the programme from that first game you went to?
I do. Yep.
You do.
I do. Yes, and my best friend at the time, who I'm still in touch with now, he's now a Nottingham Forest season ticket holder. He also has his programme from the game, complete with autographs of weirdly, the Torquay players, because obviously with the family connection, we met him afterwards, and so all these random third division mid-60s Torquay United players have autographed the programme. So yes, I do have it.
Well, that's my second question as well, and I think Kieran will appreciate why I asked this. Is why didn't you end up being a Torquay fan? If your godfather's brother was playing, why did you pick that? I can't even bring myself to say the name, Ian.
Well, I know that there's a lot of controversy on the pod in terms of your football allegiances and where you live and what have you. And the irony of all of this is that I was actually born in Devon, and my closest team to where I was born is actually Torquay United. So, and when I was very little, my dad used to he was a rugby man, and sport was the overriding thing that umbrellaed over the whole family. So if he wasn't playing rugby, he'd take me to play more to see Torquay play. So I'm guessing by rights, I should be a Torquay United fan, but I think your football allegiance arrives on your lap in a number of different ways. And I think as an 8-year-old boy walking down the road to the Goldstone ground, up the steps into the West Stand, and I mean, it was a thing of absolute beauty, stepping out and seeing the floodlit greenery in front of me, and I was just hooked from then on.
It's that first glance of the pitch, isn't it, that gets you?
Oh, as absolutely. A kid. Yeah, absolutely.
It's strange, because I've been talking to friends about this recently for various reasons, and it's somebody said the pitch can't have been green in those. When I first saw my game, the pitch probably wasn't green, but in my memory, it was the most green thing I'd ever seen, and that's. I'm like you. I just remember walking up the stairs of the White Horse Lane End, and seeing the pitch, and that's it. You're hooked. Is the programme obsession a particularly British one, Ian? I mean, or are there people in France, Australia, Brazil also collecting the programmes from that country in a strange sort of way that we do?
I don't think there's quite the kind of passion and obsession with it that we have in this country. There are some. I mean, for example, if you go to Spain, I mean, I've done a football weekend to watch El Clasico in Barcelona, and they just don't produce programs as we know it. It's more a more generic newspaper type thing. I know other countries do produce programs, but certainly not to the extent that it's sort of spawned this crazy. I mean, it's linked very closely to the whole groundhopper thing as well. I mean, I in my bid to challenge Kieran as world's dullest man, I also do a bit of. I do a bit of proofreading and editing for the wonderful Programme Collector, Programme Monthly and Football Collector magazine, and some of the ground hopping stories from these guys who organise their trips with military precision to take in sort of 17 games over the course of a weekend. It's absolutely incredible, and that's obviously very closely linked to the programme side of things. But no, I think it's very much a British thing.
I once met a chap who was very scathing about programme collectors who bought programmes of games they weren't at. He was, and obviously it was a he, was convinced that your collection should only consist of games that you'd been to, which seemed a bit extreme, even for me.
Well, yeah, I mean, personally, I think that's a bit odd. But if that's what you've decided to specialise in, then that's fair enough. But for me, it's about the programmes of Brighton and Hove Albion, home and away. I mean, I don't go as much as I used to in my youth.
I don't blame you.
Well, we've had our moments.
Ian, what's the one programme you desperately want, and what's the one that you have that other collectors would kill you for?
Well, I think in terms of the first question, I think the kind of holy grail for Albion programme collectors is the programme from when we won the Charity Shield and were justifiably crowned as champions of all England. Admittedly, it was back in 1910, but we beat Aston Villa.
Sorry, I was about to say that programmes from your imagination aren't allowed, Ian, but you did actually.
No, this is
an actual
thing.
I know.
Yes, it did actually happen, and the programme does exist. I mean, it's in terms of the programme itself, it's a little bit disappointing because the game was played on a Monday afternoon at Stamford Bridge, and Chelsea issued the programme, and it's a joint programme with the game they played on the Saturday. So it was the Charity Shield thing was a bit of an afterthought, but in terms of the kind of seismic event that was in our history, that would be the kind of holy grail for Albion programme collectors. I mean, I don't have it, obviously, but I do know a man who does have it, and I've got a scan of it on my website.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that's another thing that kind of confirms my descent into madness, the development of the Seagulls Programmes.co.uk website. Just moving back quickly to the second part of your question, I think the one programme I've got that I would say other collectors might want is the League Cup started right at the start of the 1960s, and our first home game in the competition was against Wrexham. It was played on a obscure, I think it was a Wednesday afternoon, and it was just a single sheet of paper folded in half. And I do have that, and that's probably the. And then depending on whether or not my wife is going to listen to this, I can tell you how much I paid for it. But,
go on then. Your wife, in our experience, your wife won't be listening to this here, but go on.
Well, indeed. Let's say it was over £125, which kind of in the general scheme of things doesn't sound very much, but it's a lot of money for a piece of paper.
Yeah. And how much would you have to pay for the Charity Shield one?
Crikey, thousands, I would say. I know the oldest known Brighton programme was from 1906, and I know the guy who bought that paid over £1,200 for that.
Wow.
But I think something like the Charity Shield programme, I would say maybe £3,000-4,000, maybe.
And would a programme collector who wasn't a Brighton fan pay the same amount? Is it genuinely important, or just more important to a Brighton fan?
Well, I think it would be more important to a Brighton fan, but because it was only the Charity Shield started off being played between the winners of the Southern League and the winners of the Football League.
Okay. Well, yeah.
And it was like that for just a few seasons at the start of the Charity Shield journey, if you like, before it became the Football League versus the FA Cup winners. So it does have a rarity value from that side of things, and obviously anyone who collects sort of cup finals and important games like that, it would have some value to other collectors.
I like the way you say Albion as well, Ian. Somehow it takes the curse off it for me a little bit. I've got, you won't be surprised to know, I've got suitcases full of Palace programmes, although my wife Ali adds adjectives to that. Because they're taking up a lot of space. None of them, however, are complete seasons. Is that a huge issue for collectors when you try and, I was going to say palm them off to people, but
not necessarily. I think it's more about the specific games within that season. So, if you look at the 78-79 season when we were both promoted, you would probably look at, in terms of Palace, the programme with the value would be the one right at the end of the season when you played Burnley and somehow managed to shoehorn 51,000 people into Selhurst Park. That's an interesting accounting question coming out of that, I would imagine. But so that particular programme would have the value, but a full set of programmes from any kind of significant season, i.e. a promotion season or even a relegation season, would have a little bit more value, but it's more about the specifics within the set.
Yeah, I've got that programme, and I've still got some of the bruises from when we scored the first goal.
Yeah,
it was going so well until you said the word shoehorn, and it was 50. It was 53,000 Ian, but numbers that you can only dream of. We've all stood in our lives, people of our age. We've all stood or sat by the old chap who buys two programmes. Always bought two programmes, one to write on and one to keep pristine. Are the ones with the writing on worthless?
I don't think so, because going back to what we were talking about earlier about the social commentary aspect of it, I've got quite a few from the 60s where, we had a pretty poor couple of seasons in the early 60s, and I've got programmes with what a load of old shit written on the front of the programme after we've been beaten 4-0 at home by Darlington or something like that. And for me, that adds to the kind of social history of the programme itself.
Yeah. Some
collectors will obviously strive to get mint condition copies of everything they buy, but for me, things like that are, apart from anything else, it's absolutely hilarious, but for me, it adds to the value.
You see, my problem is, Ian, whenever I do my weekly promise to Ali and say, right, okay, I'll sort them out today, I'll get rid of them, don't worry, we'll get the garage back. But I'm in there for hours because I'll pick up a 1973 pile and I'll just go, oh yeah, I love that kit, I remember that game. Oh, look at that picture of Don Rogers, I had that Parker. It's just so distracting. Like you say, it's just the most amazing social history. How do you manage to not get distracted when you're just you pick up one program and then the day's gone?
Well, I don't really. And when I started talking or thinking about the website, I had this idea back in the I think it was about 2008, 2009 that I thought, well, wouldn't it be a good idea to have a digital copy of all my programs? And I thought, well, how am I going to do that? Am I going to take a photograph of them? So the upshot of it was that I decided to scan every page of all my Brighton home programs. And if I tell you that I'm still scanning now,
oh, really?
13 years later, and bearing in mind that this, we've had 100-page programs in the last couple of seasons, so it's a bit of a problem. But you get completely lost in it. It's fantastic, and I just love reading back because even things like the manager's notes, they just provide you with such feelings of nostalgia. It's just fantastic.
It's the adverts that get me, like you say.
Yeah.
Especially some of the older ones where all the adverts are for cigarettes or tobacco.
Yes. Yeah.
Which apparently were very good for you.
And endorsed by the players of the day.
Yeah. It's just fascinating. When Kieran, at the end of one of our pods 2 weeks ago, excuse me, we'd finished recording and Kieran said that you'd agreed to come on. And Kieran and I just had, it's probably a half an hour chat, which started talking about programmes that remembered, and it was just amazing. And I remember being really excited. I think it was Derby in the early 80s. I remember turning up away at Derby, and they had an A4 programme that looked like a newspaper, and we probably talked about that for 2 weeks. It was just like the most amazing, radical thing, and it's the same for you, I imagine. I think Villa had one as well. So
they did. Pompey also had an A4 in the 70s, and some clubs actually went. I mean, Derby were one of them. I think Notts County, Northampton actually went for full-on tabloid newspapers. And I mean, obviously, how on earth? I mean, you talked about that old man sitting next to you who buys 2 programmes. I am that man. And if you've got a bloody newspaper that you've got to try and keep crease-free, I mean, dear oh dear.
Yeah, and also because I think Jimmy Hill, famously, Coventry were the first all-colour programme, is that right?
It was, yeah. I followed closely by Bournemouth, and I think that was quite an important period for programmes, because in the mid-1960s the programme had become a little bit, I mean, obviously you still had the local adverts which provided a bit of content, but clubs were becoming a little bit lazy, I think, and just thought, oh well, we just need to bash this out and it's no problem. But Jimmy Hill decided that no, we can do more, and his programme at Coventry was the first what we would now describe as a matchday magazine. I mean, they had the sky blue girl of the match as well.
Yeah,
it's very politically incorrect, but these lovely ladies in their sort of polyester jumpsuits on the back cover of the programme, and it was fantastic. And I think when we've talked with such passion and enthusiasm about the fact that these programmes are such a great memento of our first game or any game. I think to where we are now in terms of the digital side of things and what the future holds for programmes, and I it does concern me, but we have to preserve these amazing things. I mean, for example, I can't see the repair shop taking too many non-fungible tokens to repair in 50 years' time, whereas a programme from a young boy's very first game will be something that they would look at. So we have to preserve them.
I realise a lot of this interviews will be baffling to some of our younger listeners. And we do have them, amazingly.
Yep.
But do you remember, there seems to be no rhyme or reason as to when this happened, but every now and again you'd turn up at Palace and you'd buy your programme, and in the middle of it there was the Football League Review. It's like the Football League magazine that's just cropped up.
I love the review.
Are they collectible as well? Are they worth money too?
The early ones and the later ones are. They were produced in such huge numbers.
Okay.
In the middle years that, I mean, I've possibly won't surprise you to know that I've got a full set of the Football League Review, because as a child in the 60s, the Football League Review was actually one of the main sources of information about football, because we obviously didn't have the internet, and there were a number of magazines that were out there, but the Football League Review, the great thing about the review was that it didn't discriminate between the clubs. So you were just as likely to have information and an article on Manchester United as you were the Rochdale. And it started the first season when it was called Soccer Review, which was 65-66. Those are quite valuable and collectible. And then the final season, 74-75, and it only lasted half the season. Those are quite valuable.
Yeah. I've only got a couple, and that's accidental, but I was flicking through yesterday. I just love the team pictures they have for no apparent reason.
Yeah.
It's just in the middle there's a picture of Blackpool in a wonderful plain kit with all the players looking really surly, and old.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
before we had a lot of listener questions, Ian, as you'd imagine. Quite a lot of them asking for specific valuations, which we're not going to run through. But before I ask you a couple of those, you mentioned sort of niche collections. What's the most unusual, apart from you collecting Brighton programmes, which is weird, obviously? But what's the most unusual niche collection that you've heard of? The most unusual specialist collection?
I do know of one collector who only collects friendlies and testimonials, which it doesn't make too much sense, but certainly in the old days, I mean, now friendlies and testimonials just kind of don't happen these days, do they? But back in the day, it was quite a big thing, and that would probably be the sort of slightly strangest. I mean, there are people who collect one programme from every round of the FA Cup every year.
Wow!
Which, again, is a little bit niche, because then you've got to go burrowing into the non-league world for the programmes from the early rounds of the Cup.
Let me ask you some of these questions from our listeners.
Yeah.
The first one comes from Ross, who I presume is in Scotland and seems to support my Scottish team, Hibernian. He said that Hibs have stopped doing programmes for each game, have now changed to a quarterly one. So will those quarterly programmes be a lot less valuable than ones that are specific for each game, because surely the content will often be out of date? Is the cost saving worth the loss of interest and the dip in purchases?
Well, I mean, first of all, shame on you, Hibernian. But I think in terms of the sort of collectability of it, I think going to a quarterly issue, that dilutes the link between the programme and a specific game. So if Ross had taken one of his children to their first game, and instead of a specific programme for the game against Ross County or whatever, it's a quarterly magazine, then I think it would be less valuable. And things like the manager's notes, which are another particular favourite of mine. I mean, for a programme for a specific game, they are specific to that game, obviously, and that would be, again, diluted a little bit. I mean, in terms of the cost saving, that would be something for the club to decide. But certainly, the fact that the pure numbers, fewer of them, yes, they would be a bit scarce, but I don't think that would enhance their collectability.
You mentioned manager's notes. I a few years back, for 2 seasons running, I did a column in the Palace programme until a new manager came in and decided that my unedited column wasn't what he wanted to read before a game. But I think it's probably the most proud I've ever been. The first programme that appeared with me in it. I've done a lot of things that I'm proud of, but I was just walking on air for a week. That's how important. Clive Steed has a question, and I suspect Clive Steed supports the same team that you and Kieran do. As Clive Steed says, do clubs ever do a second print run after a great result? I'm thinking games like Brighton 4, Man United 0, that's the clue, and Brighton 4, Chelsea, and Brighton 4, Chelsea 1. He says, I know the Man United one sold out on the day, so having a second print one would make sense. I think that's a really interesting question, but would collectors suss out that they were a second print?
Well, I think the whole, I mean, it obviously would depend how the club kind of packaged it. If they printed it with reprint plastered across the cover, then obviously that would be a giveaway. And I think in terms of I mean, I don't know of any clubs who have specifically done that as a result of the fact that it's a fantastic result. The cost of a second print run would certainly be higher because they wouldn't print nearly as many, so it would be higher, and the club would need to be sure that it was going to sell out before committing to a second print run. So I think that would probably turn most clubs off doing that. I mean, for those two games in particular, I mean, the Brighton 4 Chelsea one from this season, I mean, that programme is still available through the club shop. And if you go on to a certain well-known auction site, you can certainly get hold of a copy of the United one from last season where we won 4-0. So, they are out there. And I don't think a club would consider that, but probably the most famous programme in England's history, i.e. the 1966 World Cup final, that's been reprinted a number of times, and so that causes all kinds of issues for collectors in terms of how you identify that it's an original from 1966 or whether or not it's a reprint. There were 2 reprints done before 1970 and then another one done in 1999. I mean, it's there are telltale signs for that, but that's probably the most famous reprint. But as far as individual clubs, no.
Ian and Clive, I'm going to say to you what I said to Kieran. We beat Man United last season. We don't bang on about it half as much as you do. But I'm glad you mentioned the finances and the cost of programmes, because it slipped my mind for the last 28 minutes that we are a football finance pod. Super City, I don't know why he wants to remain anonymous with a question about programmes, but Super City asked about the finances of programmes. Does advertising make programmes self-sustaining? And if so, why do they cost so much? And do clubs farm production out to third-party publishers?
Well, I think in terms of the advertising, obviously advertising is a very important. I mean, if you've got a club producing, let's say, 10,000 programmes, then having it, adverts have been part of programmes since the beginning of programmes themselves. So even the 19th century match cards had advertising on them. But I think it's important to realise that the advertising plus the cover price of the programme is what makes the programme self-sustaining. So obviously that would be part of the business case that the club programme editor would put together each year to justify continue with the printed programme. It's very difficult to be specific about this kind of thing because clubs tend to keep these kind of figures very close to their chests. But certainly the advertising, a combination of that and the cover price would generate enough money to justify the cost of the programmes. In terms of farming out production to third-party publishers, I mean, that's happening more and more now. I mean, there are a number of big companies. I mean, one of the biggest is, I think it's Ignition Sports Media. They do the programmes for certainly Villa, Forest and Southampton in the Premier League and a whole stack of clubs in the Championship and League One. They would assemble the content produced by the programme editor and maybe a couple of contributors, the manager's notes, although I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a manager who physically writes his notes these days. But the danger with farming it out to a third party is that you tend to get similarities in design between the clubs that publisher does the program for. I mean, obviously, if they can use the same template for the programs of 2 or 3 different clubs, then their costs come down, and you end up, I mean, I look at the programs from Albion's away fixtures, obviously, and one of the things I look for is the variety, because the task that faces the program editors these days is how to make the content in the program unique, because that's what people will buy it for. They can get all the stats from any number of places on the internet. So it's the uniqueness of the program. And if you've got a third-party publishing house doing the programs, then the temptation is to use a whole stack of syndicated articles and what have you, and you end up diluting the uniqueness of the program. So I think in terms of how much profits programs make, I mean, I would imagine the aim is for a program to break even, just justify its cost.
The advert thing is strange, Ian, isn't it? I can't imagine in 30 years' time a 45-year-old man or woman going, "Oh my God, I remember O2. Wasn't that's amazing? I remember Nokia." Whereas I pick up an old Palace programme and I see an advert for a shirt shop in Croydon where I bought my first school uniform. You just go, "That's incredible." And it's also incredible. I think football fans don't realise how, as you say, how long advertising has been with us. I mean, it's Burnley Man United from 1903, 1904 was the first, or was the only existing football film from that age. And two things that are interesting. First of all, you can see why it's called Turf Moor, because there is a moor behind the stand. But on the roof of the stand is an advert for tobacco. So it's always been there. The final question from listeners is a very interesting one, I think, Ian. It's from Martin Williamson. Martin says, "Is there more value in programmes from games that never took place? I have a copy of the Bolton-Brentford game, as my son was due to be mascot. However, the match was postponed due to a player's strike. As there would have been very few programmes distributed, would this increase its value? I would never sell it, though, as it has such sentimental value," he says in brackets, in case his son is listening. But it's an interesting one, isn't it?
It is very, very much so. And the quick answer is yes, it would be, because as with anything that's collectible, rarity provides the value. And I think you don't get it so much these days because most clubs, certainly in the Premier League, the programmes don't go to print until literally the day before the game. And the main reason for postponements in the past has been bad weather, and with the advent of heated pitches, and you don't have the vast covered terraces these days, that you don't get many games that are postponed. So you don't have the fact that you've got 10,000 programs that what do we do with them? Well, we just put them in the pulper. In terms of Martin's particular one, I mean that was postponed for a very specific reason. I would imagine there would have been a picture of his lad in the program. So the combination of the rarity of the program plus a sentimental value to him. I mean, yes, there would be value in that program. Obviously, more to him because of the family link. But I mean, just as an example of how much value postponed programs can give. Albion's game against Leeds in December 1981, that was postponed very, very close to kickoff. And whilst they pulped most of them, I think it's around about 50 survived.
Right.
And the last one of those that changed hands for 2,500 quid.
Wow.
So there is a lot of value in old postponed programs.
I remember a Palace game. It may have been that same winter. It was a Boxing Day game. It was postponed. We were literally walking up Holmesdale Road and we found out it was postponed.
Yeah.
The game was replayed, I think, in sort of March, April, and they just had the same programme. They didn't pulp them. They kept them. So the game took place in March and the programme was for Boxing Day. I've got two more questions for you, Ian, before we let you go. The first one is the obvious one, and it's one that many people also emailed us to ask. What's the penny black of the football programme world?
Right. I have done a bit of research into this in the past and just sort of updated this the other day. There are a number of there are a number of kind of massive games in the history of football, obviously, as you would expect. And you would think the 1923 FA Cup final, obviously the first one at Wembley, that's valuable. But if we look at it in terms of the most expensive football programme ever sold, there was an auction in 2013 where the FA Cup final from, I think it was 1901, when Tottenham beat Sheffield United, that was sold for £15,000.
My goodness.
But then later in that same auction, the programme for the 1882 Cup final came up for sale. So that was only the 10th FA Cup final that had ever taken place between Old Etonians and Blackburn Rovers. It's a single card. All it had on it was the lineups, the 10 previous winners of the Cup. It was written on. The original owner had underlined 6 of the Old Etonians players and said, those marked deserved notice. And that went for £35,250, which is an absolutely astonishing amount of money for essentially a postcard.
Wow. It won't surprise any of our listeners who understand that I have a grudge against most teams. The Old Etonians of that era, I particularly dislike because of Lord Kinnaird, who was a dirty, fouling cheat. Long story as to how I found that out. So if you had the 1923 Cup final, if you had one with the hoof print of the white horse on it,
oh my goodness,
that would be worth a lot of money, wouldn't it? I'm just thinking about faking one.
Yeah.
Our final question, Ian, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. It's not so much a question, it's more of a statement of intent. There's a lot of our listeners got in touch with us, not with a question, but to express dismay at something you spoke about, the increasing digitalisation of programmes, which financially and commercially probably makes sense. Is the printed programme doomed, Ian? And what do we lose if it is?
If I answer the second part of that question first, I think what we lose is that link between the person and the game. So going back to my first game on the 28th of August 1968, I've got a physical, tangible reminder of that game, which I can look at any time, pick it up, open it, look at the programme notes and see my godfather's brother's name on the team sheet. It's a physical reminder. I mean, I mentioned earlier a slightly flippant remark about how many non-fungible tokens will be presented to the repair shop in 50 years' time, but that's what we're looking at now. I want my I've got a 21-year-old son, and his first game, he was 6 weeks old. I took him sort of underneath my coat, and I've obviously got the programme for that game, and he'll be able to look at that for the rest of his life. And that, for me, is we just cannot afford to lose that. I understand we live in a digital world. I mean, and there's a certain irony is that I've spent the last 12 years of my life digitising my programme collection, and I am aware of the slight irony in that, but I've done that to almost preserve the physicality of it all. And for me, it's so important that we continue the cult of the printed programme, if you like. And part of that, it's not only at the top of the game, but it's also going down the pyramid as well. I mean, there's a hugely thriving non-league programme world, and the sort of 16, 17-year-old lads who put together the programme for Dulwich Hamlet and teams like that, they're the future programme editors. And without that experience of producing printed programmes, how are they going to develop as football journalists? I mean, I feel so passionately about this, Kevin. I understand it goes against everything we live in now in terms of the digital world, but it is vital that we preserve these historical artifacts, because that's exactly what they are.
I suspect that 99% of our listeners will agree with you, as Kieran and I certainly do. I had this conversation last year with somebody at Palace. It basically was saying, "Oh, come on, Grandad, it's they're just pieces of paper." But I just pointed out, I said, I've not seen a programme for the first Palace game, whether it was in 1905 or 1862, as Steve Parish claims. But the program, I've seen pictures of programmes, and I said, look, there's a picture on the front of that early programme of the Crystal Palace, and if you look at the programme for our last game, there's a picture of the Crystal Palace, and that's what's important. That's why they're important. It's our history. It's our continuity. It's the same with, well, not with you, because you changed your nickname and you badged to copy us. But you know what I mean. It's that link with the past, and it is important. It is important for our heritage, football heritage, because increasingly, especially working class history, is shrinking basically. And
completely.
For a lot of us, the history of our football club, the badge, the nickname, the kit, is a link to the past. It's a link to the people who founded your club. It's a link to the glaziers that moved the Crystal Palace from Hyde Park to Penge and started the football club. And it is important. It's really important. And also,
it really is.
It's just fun. It's just fun to lose yourself for 3 hours on a cold winter's afternoon when you say, Ali, I'm getting rid of these programs, and then you just go, like I said before, I think they're wonderful.
Browsing through the player profiles from the early 80s. I mean, that's
they got through a lot of prawn cocktail and steak in those days. Didn't they?
Yes, absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Favourite meal? Prawn cocktail, steak. Ambition? Astronaut. That's fair. Ian, it's been. We may have stopped recording this some time ago. I don't know, but I could talk to you all day. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, Ian. I wish you all the best. In the unlikely event that I ever come across a Brighton and Hove Albion programme you haven't got, I've now decided that the mature thing to do is not throw it away; it's to give it to you. So,
fantastic.
I would wish you well with your football club, but I can't. But I wish you well with your I wish you well with the rest of your digitising. Nice to talk to you, and thank you so much. Bye bye now.
And you, Kevin. All the best. Cheers.
I mean, I found that fascinating, Kieran, because, of course, like most football fans, I'm mildly obsessed with football programmes, and I think it will be a very sad day for us all if it does go completely digital, because for me, they are the most remarkable bits of social history. And it's, as we discussed, it's not just necessarily the football stuff that gets your heart racing. It's all the other stuff around it, the adverts and the managers talking and just where the referee's from. I love them. And it was really interesting to hear someone who knows so much about them.
Absolutely. And you're right to say, it's a slice of history. You can go back. I remember the first time I went to Brighton, which was 1974, and I've still got the programme. We lost 1-0 at home to Leatherhead in the FA Cup.
Chris Kelly.
Chris the Lip Kelly. That's right.
The Leatherhead Lip, who of course, I remember that very well, yeah.
It was great. And, Ian, I know Ian, and he's got a huge passion, not just for what he does in terms of programs for my club, but as you could heard from the interview, he knows the world of programs inside out, and that level of affection that you've got for a hobby, I think is part of being a bloke, isn't it?
Yeah, actually, I remember. I don't know why it was on the big match. You lost 8-2 to Bristol Rovers, was it?
That's right, yeah. War Boys and Bannister.
Yes, the deadly duo up front. And for some reason, Brian Clough was interviewed on the big match, and he brought Nigel in with him, who was a little kid at the time. Yes. And it was hard to remember who was more bemused, Brian Moore or Nigel Clough, who clearly had been dragged away from watching Thunderbirds to distract Brian Moore from asking Brian Clough about losing 8-2 to Bristol Rovers. Anyway, thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod as well, that's very kind of you. And you can do so by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. Our next live show, as you may have heard, was due to take place at Plymouth Argyle's home park on Tuesday the 13th of December. However, for various reasons, including the upcoming rail strikes and the fact that Plymouth will be playing at home in the Papa John's Trophy that week, we have agreed with the club to postpone the show. We're sorry about that, and we're sorry about the short notice. We'll let you know the new date as soon as it's been agreed, but it will probably be February or March of next year. We hope you can still make it. If you can't, then of course you'll be able to get a full refund. And as we also said, the first ever Price of Football replica shirt will be available to pre-order from this coming Monday, December the 5th. It's a lovely shirt, it says here, and I agree. It's white with a green and yellow trim and a lovely badge with Finley and smudge on it. And you can find a link to our online store on priceoffootball.com and on our Twitter feeds. I don't think there's one on my Twitter feed, Kieran, to be perfectly honest, unless you've put it there. And also you can find it in the description of this episode in your podcast app. We're only going to make as many shirts as we get orders, so please make sure you order yours as soon as the pre-sale period starts at 10 a.m. on Monday. Don't ask for it as a Christmas present. They won't be ready. We'll be doing the live show at Plymouth before the shirts are ready. But they are available in adults and kids sizes, and all the profits we make will go to Gamble Aware, so it's in a good cause. And if you have a question, of course, that you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. Kieran, I shall let you go and search for capers.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't think we're getting it on the Dragon's Den with our approach to selling football shirts, are we?
I don't think we are. We're not getting a foot through the door there. Yeah, they're all right. They're nice. What are they? What's your product? Yeah, it's a football shirt. How many have you got? We ain't got any at the moment. But what sort of order? What sort of numbers are you manufacturing? 10,000? As many as people ask for. Yeah, we're going through the trapdoor, aren't we? You're right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
The Price of Football. The Price of Football.